Hey, so what I want to show you in this video is my homemade wood-fired hot tub. It's not something new that I've just created. It's been about nearly a decade old now. I think it's about 9 years old. And when I was came up with the idea and looking for inspiration and other people's ideas that I could steal, there wasn't a lot out there that I thought was really worth copying. A load of sort of temporary homemade stuff, but nothing that I thought would be worth spending a lot of time on. So over the next sort of period of time, I gathered a few things up, and I'm just going to give you a walkthrough of what I've ended up with, how it works, what maybe I would do again if I did it again, and how it's all going. But I think I can genuinely say it's the best homemade one I've seen. Not wanting to blow my own trumpet, I did have some help with some bits, but let's have a look. So if we start with the basic concept is we sit in here. We'll go through that in a minute. Water comes through, powered by a central heating pump. I just keep the weather off it with that plastic bag. Coming through copper pipe into what was formerly just a wood burning stove, and then back down the pipe, round the back and into the tank. Obviously smoke comes up out the chimney, probably can't see that because it's so hot now. And the beauty of this sort of project, I find, is that we are outside, so it's all a bit crude, and that suits speed when making these things, and that has been important in a few elements which we'll talk now. So the central heating pump is bringing the water through and into these pipes, and then it splits into 3 manifolds. Each manifold has 6 mild steel inch pipes that run through. So 3 layers of 6 pipes that the flames there are heating. Obviously surface area really important for heat. I want to melt my phone here. Heat transfer, so we wanted to split that up as much as we can. When I say we, I mean I. So there we. So over the years we've got a few drips, and the drips do to be honest, come and go because of the heat that this thing gets to. I literally just drilled, I think it's 72 holes through the manifold steel and the 72 in total through the stove, and just threaded them through, welded the pipes into the manifolds, and then put tank connectors. I don't know if I can zoom in yet, but it's super blurry, so we'll zoom straight out again. Tank connector back on, so that has on the whole worked well. I've stripped it down and re-sealed it once. My welding probably isn't quite what it could be, but it hasn't been terrible. To start with, I used expensive high heat silicone to fill in some of the drips and gaps, but then I realised that actually you can buy a whole mastic tube of something called, well, the product I used was like Stix-like, and I think the last word can be left to the imagination, and that has actually got a really, really high heat tolerance and I just pumped it in the second time. I didn't worry about tiny little bits on the end of my finger. Sealed around all the edges, anywhere where it could leak, and that was good for a number of years. But as I say, it's nearly 10 years old now, so it's got some drips coming, but it's still functioning. Obviously there's quite a lot of pressure coming through those pipes, and when it gets hot, it expands and everything changes. So where the drips come from is quite changeable. Roof tiles stood up to the heat really well, just simple. It's worth saying that I only spent about 100 quid on this whole thing, and most of the cost of that was the lid for the tank which we actually sit in, because the wood was not free, and nor was the insulation. We'll come to that in a minute. The stove came from an old vicarage down the road that some of my family members were living in for a little bit, and it was condemned, so it was left in their garden, and then when they were moving on, landlords didn't want it, so I said, if you're doing nothing with that, can I have it? So the answer was yes, so I brought it up. That was the donor stove that I cannibalised. They sort of didn't believe it. It's a bit nutty, Professor, to say, oh, I'll turn it into a hot tub, but that's exactly what's happened. Stone, just gathered from around the fields, roof tiles left over, chimney, just a piece of mild steel tube, rain cap made by splitting the top 6 inches in half and welding that on top. It's not completely sealed, but as I said, we're outside, so the beauty of it is it can be a bit crude. So the tub, let's start with that. The tub is an old cement-based cattle feeding trough. Now we can fit 8 people sat around in here. It's 8 adults. Your knees do start to get a bit close, but this, see, we live in the countryside, this I could see from the end of my garden up on a hill. Farmer had stopped keeping cows, had arable crops growing in his fields, and I asked him if I could have the trough, which he obliged. The trough itself, if you can see the steam coming out there, it's actually the second lid I've made. This is the weak point, and I won't make it. I'll spend more money and get marine ply next time, but it's got 2 inches of insulation inside, and if you have the lid open, or if you run the pool cleaner, which is that thing there, and the water comes out, gets filtered and goes back in, any crack, any sort of contact with the outside air makes a massive difference on how long it's going to take to heat up. So inside the trough we have a bench. The bench is made of offcuts of elm that I got from a sawmill. The elm is very good in the water. Again, 10 years old, it is starting to rot now, but it's done very, very well. We don't keep it full, we use it only a few times a year, so it does get dry, wet, which isn't good for it. But I think even in the old days they used to make water pipes out of elm, so it is good in the water. The white pipe is connected to the outlet with the hot water coming out, because we found that where hot water rises, the top would get very hot, the bottom would sometimes be really cold. So I've just got a pipe in the bottom to make sure that the hot water starts its journey at the bottom. So this thermometer is an incubator thermometer, so if you ever see any of my other videos you'll know where that comes from, and I'll try extremely hard not to drop my phone. Focus it on. Come on, focus. There we go. So we are currently running at 35 and counting. And it takes a few hours to heat up, maybe 3, from cold out the hose pipe to 37.5, which is like the lowest you would want to get in. You can cook it right up. I've had it at 50 degrees before, because I slightly forgot that it was on. So there's no other temperature control other than how you stoke the fire. So it's probably, what are we on? 35.5 at the moment at the top. But if I just grab, oh, I've not got enough hands for this, but this is the water coming straight out of the boiler. Don't know if I'm going to be able to show you how hot that's coming out, but I put the thermometer on there earlier and it went over the top of its limit, and because it's an incubator thermometer it tops out at 40, so it was punching out sort of probably something like 45 degrees. What I would do again, I said I'd make the lids out of something more water resistant. They've been yacht varnish, but still not ideal. I wouldn't put the inlet and the outlet at the same height, because, and they're so close together, because I have to attach that tube to get a good circulation, otherwise we get serious cold spots. I would also probably put a bottom drain in, because emptying it and cleaning it is a pain in the butt. I have had over the years a problem with the lowest point of the plumbing at the back there getting cold and cracked. So I don't know if you can see there, but there is a valve that I put in at the bottom to drain the system in there to keep it a bit more frost protected. As I say, I spent less than 100 quid on the whole thing. First year actually the central heating pump rusted up, so that's the second-hand central heating pump that I've put in. I got it off eBay, about 15 quid. So I think that's it for me. Thank you.